President William Ruto, and the new chair of the Africa Union Commission. Mr. Speaker, Raila Odinga was Kenya's best that we sent to the continental stage. And Mr. Speaker, every other time that a Kenyan is out there on the international or continental stage, I remember when Faith Kipyegon was breaking the 1,500-meter world record, all Kenyans stood up in unison to cheer Faith Kipyegon. I remember David Rudisha, the great run that he made to win the 800-meter championship. I think, Mr. Speaker, that record has not been broken. All Kenyans rose in unison to celebrate a great Kenyan. I remember even, I think she's called Beatrice Chebet, who broke the 5,000-meter world record and went ahead to break the 10,000-meter female world record. Kenyans stood up in unison and cheered on Faith Beatrice Chebet. That is the attitude and spirit with which we ought to approach the attempt by the Right Honorable Raila Odinga to become the chair of the Africa Union Commission. Mr. Speaker, I want to report to the House that the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, at this very moment, is in very good spirit, is in very good health, is unbowable, is unwalkable, is indefatigable, and is still committed to making Kenya a great nation. There are those who think that by throwing barbs at him online, composing small inchas and compositions, that they are going to deter the fighting spirit, the indomitable spirit of our enigma, Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga, please take your time, relax, make phone calls to your fellow leaders across Africa, thank them for the vote they gave you, take time to reflect, and when you come back home, let no one try to direct Raila Odinga on which direction he should take or on which action he should take. He is a man who knows only one thing, and what he knows is what is best for Kenya. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank President William Ruto. It is not taken for granted that when a Kenyan comes up to run for a continental position, that the government will support that Kenyan. And Mr. Speaker, just next door, we have a friend of ours called Raa Odinga. Raa Odinga at some point ran for the Secretary General of the United Nations. Raa Odinga was originally Ugandan by nationality, but because of local competition, Raa Odinga ran for the UN Secretary General position as an Ivorian citizen and not as a Ugandan citizen. Why? Because the government did not see it fit to support him. A Ugandan could take the citizenship of another country to run for a global position. Mr. Speaker, if we didn't have mature politics in this country, you would have found a situation where Raila Odinga is running for chair of the AUC with a South Sudanese citizenship or with a Ugandan citizenship. But William Ruto took this as Project Kenya. It was not Project William Ruto. This was Project Kenya. This was Kenya sending their best son to the continental stage. And William Ruto, we thank you because you walked the talk. You walked with the candidate. You opened doors for the candidate, and you allowed Raila Odinga, despite the political competition, to be a candidate for Kenya rather than a candidate for any political formation. I want to urge the government of Kenya and also urge this House. Mr. Speaker, the sessional paper on Kenya's foreign policy was laid on the table of this House last week by the leader of majority. We now have an opportunity to weigh in on Kenya's foreign policy. I know that my colleague, Senator for Kisii, Senator Onyonka, is one of the most exposed and experienced diplomats in this House, having served as an assistant minister for foreign affairs. Honorable members, you have an opportunity to weigh in on Kenya's foreign policy. And I want to request the Speaker to direct the relevant committee, I think it will be the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, if not the Foreign Relations Committee, that they must bring back a report to this House. They must scrutinize that sessional paper. They must get views from experts. They must look at it and confirm that Kenya is adopting a foreign policy that is pragmatic. That was the position of the founding fathers of this nation. They said we face neither east nor west, but they said we are going to face the direction where the wind will blow in our sails. And that should be the position that this generation takes. There is nothing fashionable about being seen as pro-American or being seen as pro-Chinese. Those are constructs that do not matter to us. We shall face the direction that adds value to the lives of the people of Kenya, the direction that is willing to partner with us in achieving our developmental objectives, and the direction that is respectful to the people of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, that then should also ensure that even I heard some people say that we should withdraw from the Africa Union, we should draw from global commitments. Mr. Speaker, we should never make the mistakes that we saw the Brits do with Brexit. They are regretting it today. We should never make the irresponsible decisions that we have seen the Americans doing under Trump, saying that they're withdrawing from the World Health Organization, they are withdrawing from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, they are withdrawing from the Kyoto Protocol. We cannot go for isolation. We cannot go for a situation where we are left alone as pariahs in the global world order. We shall continue supporting and fulfilling our international obligations, be it at the Africa Union level, be it at the East Africa Community level, where Kenya is the current chair. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to congratulate Djibouti that their candidate is now the chair of the Africa Union Commission. I do not know much about the gentleman who has been elected to that position, but as you have said, this election was not just about the individuals, it was about the nationalities that fronted those individuals. Mr. Speaker, as has been said by the Leader of Majority, our President now has been given a rare opportunity to propose reforms at the Africa Union Commission. Mr. Speaker, I also recall that a good friend of this House, Ambassador Amayo, Ambassador Amayo is a good friend to this House because every time and everywhere he was posted, be it in London, be it in Washington, whenever a Senate delegation came, he welcomed the Senate delegation. He was unlike many ambassadors who look with contempt at members of parliament. And, Honorable Speaker, I can confirm that everywhere I found Ambassador Amayo, he was very respectful to parliament. He is also now Kenya's representative to the Africa Union for reforms, and that is a seasoned diplomat. I hope, working together with President Ruto, they'll be able to deal with the key issues that need to be transformed at the Africa Union Commission. In Africa, Mr. Speaker, there are still a lot of challenges that we now must ask the new Africa Union Commission chair to settle down and not to be drawn into Kenya's political and toxic social media wars, that he should now settle down and deal with the key challenges that are facing Africa. When Kenya proposed Right Honorable Raila Odinga to be the chair of the commission, we knew that the challenge that was ahead of us. In Africa, the commission or the Africa Union has a target to silence the guns in Africa. Unfortunately, the guns are raging even louder. They are raging in Sudan. They are raging in Somalia. They are raging in Nigeria in the fight against Boko Haram. Mr. Speaker, the guns are not silent in Africa. That is what we are now challenging the new chair of the commission to get down to business too, and not to go around in political rallies in Djibouti trying to rub it in that Kenya did not get that position. Mr. Speaker, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area was a matter or an idea that was excellent. It was mooted just around the time of COVID. Today, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, Mr. Speaker, is non-operational because sovereign states are still unwilling to deal with the tariff and non-tariff barriers. They are still unwilling to align their legislation to build one common market in Africa. Mr. Speaker, within the Africa Union Commission or within the African territory, we have a coup belt that is running from West Africa through the Sahel, coming into Central Africa, and if you are not careful, it will go all the way to the Indian Ocean. Mr. Speaker, it is said that in Africa, you can travel from West to East Africa, going through countries that have got military dictatorships and leaderships that came to office through coup d'etats. That is the reason why the Africa Union was established, to deter leaders from taking over power through coup d'etats. Flights are still very expensive in Africa. If you want to go to West Africa, you have the unfortunate situation where sometimes you have to go to Doha or to Dubai for you to be able to land in Accra or to land in Guinea-Conakry. Mr. Speaker, those are the challenges that we expect that the new commission chair will deal with. Mr. Speaker, I want to finalize by urging fellow senators and urging all Kenyans that having seen the situation and the terrain in the African continent, let us now turn to our country and make our country great. Mr. Speaker, the phrase, love your neighbor as you love yourself, appears in the Bible not just once. It appears 3 times. It appears in the book of Leviticus, the book of Mark, and the book of Matthew. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. We cannot love Africa more than we love Kenya. This is a time for us to come back to Kenya and make Kenya great again. Mr. Speaker, we need to make Kenya great again. And I, as a leader of the Homa Bay delegation, am willing to partner and work with all the leaders in this republic who are willing to make Kenya great again. We are not going to make Kenya great through negative ethnicity. We are not going to make Kenya great through division. We are not going to make Kenya great through revisionism, where we want to go back to history and dwell on the justices or injustices that have been committed to us. Mr. Speaker, we will only be respected in Africa if we build a strong economy. Our economy is not growing at the rate that will make Kenya a superpower in Africa. We cannot afford to be growing at 4 or 5% when Tanzania is growing at 7%. We must put all our thoughts, our attention and efforts on growing an economy, and the least metric should be 7% annual growth. That is when we'll be respected. We have this misconceived notion that Kenya is still a great economy. We could be great now, but Mr. Speaker, if you remember the mathematics of approaching speed, there are smaller economies that are approaching us at a higher speed than we are moving. And if we are not careful, we'll be the smallest economy in East Africa. Mr. Speaker, we must spend on our military, and this is a conversation we must have. We are spending only 1% of our GDP on the military, and yet we are seeing guns pointed at Kenya from all corners. We are seeing drones pointed at Kenya from all corners. Mr. Speaker, the war in Syria has confirmed that your enemy does not need to be your neighbor, that Turkey can hammer Syria from wherever they are, that even Kenya can be hammered from Yemen, Kenya can be hammered from the UAE. This is a time for us to ask ourselves, is our military getting the right budgetary allocation? And are they making the right decisions with those budgets? Mr. Speaker, every time we go for a public holiday, we see those jets flying past. And to be honest, Mr. Speaker, since I was a little child, it is the same jets I've been seeing flying past. I wonder if there was a serious strife or any battle between Kenya and a neighboring state, whether those jets will be airworthy or whether they'll be able to go and attack the enemy. We must have that conversation. This idea of saying that the military is a closed black box that we cannot talk about, if we have a weak military, no one is going to give us respect. You have seen instances where, in the old saying, that the tail can wag a dog. You are seeing a tiny country, and I'm not going to mention names, a tiny country being able to ambush, attack, invade, and overthrow the president of another country which is 100 times its size. Mr. Speaker, this is a conversation we must have. We must come back to our education system. At some point, Kenya was a regional superpower because of our advanced education system. You had Ugandan professors coming to teach here. You had children coming from other countries to study in Kenya. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, this is the reason why diaspora remittances is our highest forex earner, because we trained and built a very strong pool of professionals. Mr. Speaker, I am willing to partner with a government that is willing to look at the CBC and to make the right decisions to make the CBC fit for purpose so that our education system still becomes attractive to the region. Mr. Speaker, our health sector, people from Tanzania a long time ago, they used to ask, why should you go to London for treatment when you can come to Nairobi Hospital? Why should you go to Germany when you can come to Aga Khan? Or when you can come to even Kenyatta National Hospital, Mr. Speaker, at some point was attracting tourists, medical tourists from the region. Those are the quiet ways of strengthening yourself on the continental stage, Mr. Speaker. It is not about how loud you are on Twitter. It is not, there's this thing called KOT, Kenyans on Twitter or Kenyans online. You only project strength through certain attributes, not noise making and not attacking other people online. Mr. Speaker, we need to go back to our transport sector. Our comparative advantage as a country, part of it is our location. It is geography that allows us to have a port, almost midway from North to Southern Africa. The port of Mombasa is a gift from God. Our location is a gift from God. Mr. Speaker, we must modernize the port. And I am willing to encourage this government that if we cannot get civil servants and bureaucrats who can modernize that port, then we'd rather seek a strategic partner, Mr. Speaker. Of course, a strategic partner procured in a transparent and open manner. Mr. Speaker, we have gone with the liaison committee to Dubai. We went to DP World. And some members here, we went to DP World, they told us the kind of operations they're running all over the world. They're running ports in Manchester, they're running ports in China, they're running ports in the US. And us, we want to turn our ports into theaters for appointment of tribal and political loyalists. Mr. Speaker, we are not going to make it. Kenya Airways has been the pride of Africa, but of late it has become the shame of Kenya. Kenya Airways is another form of expression of strength on the continental stage. But, Mr. Speaker, every time we travel, even members in this House would prefer to travel to fly Ethiopian, Emirates, Qatar, and not Kenya Airways. These are the fundamentals we must come back to. An SGR we built terminated nowhere in some field in Naivasha. How can you have an SGR that terminates in some place in Suswa, and yet there is no last mile for connectivity? We must put money, even if you are taking a loan, Mr. Speaker. I will support a loan request for extension of the SGR from Suswa to go all the way to Kisumu, to go all the way to Malaba, to go all the way to Uganda. That is how we can be relevant to the people of Uganda, not by shouting, but providing connectivity to them. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I want to urge the relevant committee that our foreign policy must be examined by this House. I want to urge the people of Kenya that when a Kenyan is out there on the international stage, we have an obligation to cheer them on. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, you are going to have a situation where one day Faith Kipyegon is breaking a world record, and half of Kenya is cheering, and another half is not cheering Faith Kipyegon because she comes from the same village as the president. That is where we are heading to. You will have an untidy situation where Harambee Stars is playing and scoring goals. Half of Kenya is cheering, and the other half is not cheering because the team has Ogola, Otieno, Onyango, Wafula, Wekesa. We cannot build a country that is that petty. Mr. Speaker, I want to urge that this conversation in this House will be different from the conversation we had yesterday in the other House, and it will be different from the conversation we have had elsewhere. Because when it comes to issues of the original sin, we have a lot to say about the original sin in this country. The first deputy president to be thrown out of office without ceremony was Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Jaramogi Oginga Odinga picked himself up. He did not go inciting hateful tribal sentiments. He went and formed the Kenya People's Union. Jaramogi Oginga Odinga was put in house detention. His son Raila Odinga was in detention for 8 years, fighting for this country. When he left detention, he didn't come out bitter. He didn't build artificial warriors and soldiers. He did a handshake with President Moi, which was unthinkable because for him, he was concerned about making Kenya great. There are people who have suffered in this country. And I don't want to make parallels. I don't want to draw comparisons because then we will be trying revisionism. Mr. Speaker, let us focus on making Kenya great. And negative ethnicity, the divisions that we are seeing, the belittling of certain communities that we are seeing, even in parliament and out there on the social media, is not going to work for this country. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure you that as perhaps one of the longest serving members in this House on this side, and as you know, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to opposition, we know all the tricks and we have the stamina. We shall work together with a government that is committed to making Kenya great again. William Ruto, do not be distracted into negative ethnic conversation. Make Kenya great. Fix our military, fix our economy, fix our logistics, fix our health, fix our education. Make Kenya truly a silicon savannah, and you will have the unlimited support of Senator Moses Kajwang, the ODM brigade, and by extension, Raila Odinga. Mr. Speaker, I second.
To the member can open the floor for debate. Recalling that the African Union (AU) was launched in 2002 as a continental body consisting of 55 member states that make up the countries of the African continent, with a vision of creating an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own citizens.